I'm going to be trying something a bit different with this video series. Originally, I had planned to release these as motorcycle vids, recorded while I was riding either to or from work, but I really didn't like how they turned out when I was finished with them. I don't think this topic lends itself to that sort of format, but I also don't want to spend the next 2 years producing these videos alongside my already time-consuming Bob Duco videos. So instead, I'm going to make these lower production vids with minimal visuals and little script. I do this in large part just to get more content out onto the channel, as I realize my Duco videos are coming out rather few and far between. I also do this because I promised Tex 959 2-3 months ago that I'd get something up in response to his request, and I promised I'd get it out quicker than I normally do. That's where the idea for doing these vids on the motorcycle came from, but like I said, I didn't really like how they turned out, so here we are. I nonetheless hope you enjoy this series, and if you don't mind the low-budget product, I'd be happy to do more of these. Just say the word. Mike Winger is an associate pastor at Hosanna Christian Fellowship in Bellflower, California, but apparently spends a great deal of his time and energy creating Christian apologetic videos on YouTube. I had never heard of this guy before he was brought to my attention by one of my subscribers, Tex959. Tex had asked if I had any videos regarding Psalm 22 in the comments section of one of my update vids, and I directed him to episode 37 of my Duco series. I then went and found the video of Mike's to which Tex959 was referring, and I instantly knew I had misled poor Tex. Episode 39 only dealt with 4 verses from Psalm 22, and I discovered that Mike had made prophecy connections between the psalm and the passion narratives of Jesus for every verse. Mike had created a 16-point list of these connections, and I knew instantly that my episode 37 was going to be woefully inadequate for Tex. I jumped back to the comment section of the vid where Tex and I were having our conversation, and I told him I would whip something together that would be much better for his purposes. The video series that follows is the result of that conversation. But before we can begin to dive into Mike's individual points of comparison between Psalm 22 and the passion narratives of Jesus, it needs to be acknowledged up front that the word Messiah is not found anywhere in the text of Psalm 22. The psalmist does not refer to himself as the Messiah in any of the verses. The subject of the psalm is anonymous. We're not told who it is. Jewish tradition has associated the subject of the psalm with Esther, Christians with Jesus. Others have associated the character of Psalm 22 with Israel itself, or with one of its kings, or specifically with David. And the reason why there is such a wide disparity of identities for the narrator of Psalm 22 is because he or she is not named. So the psalm is not in the realm of messianic literature. So then, what is Psalm 22? As noted in episode 37 of my series answering Bob Duco's assertions about the truth of the Bible, Psalm 22 is classified as a song of lament. The psalms come in a variety of types, covering songs of praise, wisdom and royal songs, songs of thanksgiving, and songs of lament. There are no psalms of the Messiah, nor are there any psalms of prophecy. Hebrew prophecy has its own genre and its own distinctive features, and none of the psalms fit that style of literature. And even if some did, Psalm 22 would not be one of them. But all this does is raise the question of why Psalm 22 is nonetheless considered prophecy, especially by those of a Christian mindset. I discuss this in another of my episodes dealing with Bob Duco, episode 29, and I refer anyone wanting a deeper discussion of this topic to avail themselves of that video. But briefly, the idea of the Psalms as prophecy arises from the belief that King David was the author of the Psalms, and that David himself was a prophet. But this idea was not native to the Psalms themselves, but came about much later in Jewish history, around the time of the Second Temple. The notion of David as a prophet was also not contemporaneous with him. Then we have the additional problem that David was not even necessarily the author of any of the Psalms, and in fact an argument can be made that he indeed did not write any of them. And again, this is explored and explained more fully in episode 29, so it doesn't need to occupy our time here. The point is that Psalm 22 is simply not considered prophecy in its own native context. It is considered prophecy by Christian apologists who want to associate it with the passion narrative of Jesus. It is not messianic, it makes no mention of the Messiah, and the narrator does not identify his or herself as the Messiah. So there are a couple of problems right out of the gate that apologists like Mike Winger skip over when they forward Psalm 22 as somehow prophetic regarding the passion of Jesus. But there's one more issue, And that is how Psalm 22 might have been used by the early followers of Jesus. After his crucifixion and death, Jesus' followers, who had great affection for him and great expectations for him, were thrown into a great state of shock, and I would even say of denial about what had just happened. But they needed to make sense out of these stunning events. Now, it may have been natural for those people of that time to turn to their Holy Scriptures for comfort and to seek meaning. In so doing, turning to songs of lament as Psalm 22, they may have found similarities between what the psalmist was describing and how they viewed their fallen leader. The psalm could have helped them give voice, give meaning to the recent shocking events surrounding his execution and death. And by using Psalm 22 as a template, these early followers could have built the foundation of an original passion narrative, which would then develop into the written narratives as we find them in the Gospels. In other words, the Passion of Christ wasn't found in Psalm 22 as prophecy. Psalm 22, at least in part, was used to create the Passion narrative of Jesus. So it isn't that the details of Christ's crucifixion were forecast in Psalm 22. Psalm 22 provided the framework around which the Passion narratives were built. But they didn't do a very good job in following Psalm 22 exactly, not in the way if we are to believe the psalm is specifically about Jesus, as advanced by apologists like Mr. Winger. And that is where we are going to turn next as we look at Winger's 16 points of comparison between Psalm 22 as prophecy, forecasting the New Testament's passion narratives about Jesus.